The microphone hit our ears before the man did. "You want to know what a nobody looks like?" The voice boomed across the forecourt, amplified, polished, sure of itself. "Look right there. That fellow in the costume stands all day, says nothing, follows orders he didn't write for a wage he can't argue. That, my friends, is a man who surrendered his life. Don't be him." I was at the South Post that morning, 8 feet to the left of the man he was pointing at, and I will tell you the truth. My jaw tightened, and Corporal Ellis Vane's did not. He stood under the tall black bearskin with his white gloves still, and his rifle vertical and his eyes set on the middle distance, and not one muscle in his face acknowledged that 200 people had just turned to stare at him like he was an exhibit. I had known Vane for 3 years, and I had never once gotten him to tell me where he came from, so I want to be honest at the start of this. When the speaker called him a nobody, a small, ugly part of me almost agreed. I thought I knew the whole of him. I was about to learn I knew nothing. The man with the microphone called himself a peak performance coach. He had rented the wide stone plaza beyond our gates for a morning activation, which as far as I could tell meant 200 people in matching gray shirts paying to be shouted at. A banner behind his little stage read "Rise" with a single capital letter and an exclamation point, the way ambitious men brand themselves when they have decided the world owes them attention. He had a headset mic, a clicker in his hand, and a projection screen the height of a doorway, angled so the morning sun didn't wash it out. And he had picked our forecourt because, I suppose, the immovable guardsman in the red tunic made a useful prop, a symbol he could point at, the opposite of everything he was selling. "Discipline without ambition is just obedience," he told them, pacing. "Obedience is for people who gave up. You see the difference. You see it. That man behind me has discipline, but he has no drive. He'll stand on that exact square of stone until the day he dies, and the world will never know his name. And that, friends, is the saddest thing I can show you on a Tuesday." The crowd murmured. A few of them laughed, the nervous laugh of people who aren't sure if mockery is allowed but enjoy it anyway. One young man in the front row turned and filmed Vane on his phone, panning slowly from the speaker to the guard and back, narrating something to himself. Vane breathed. That was all. I watched his chest rise under the brass buttons and settle, slow as a tide. His eyes did not flick to the speaker. They did not flick to the camera. He was somewhere else entirely, in that place the best of us learn to go, where the noise becomes weather and you are the stone the weather happens to. I have stood that post myself. I know the cost of it. People think the discipline is in the not moving. It isn't. The discipline is in the not caring, and that is a far harder thing, because a man's pride is the loudest voice he owns, and you have to put it in a room and shut the door on it for 2 hours at a stretch. Vane had shut the door. I could see it in the evenness of him. The speaker, I'll call him the coach, because he never gave a name worth keeping, sensed he had something. Performers always do. He drifted closer to the gate, close enough that his amplified voice fell directly on us, and he turned his back to Vane theatrically, addressing the crowd while gesturing over his shoulder with a thumb. "Here's a thought experiment," he said. "Suppose I walked up to him right now. Suppose I said his name, if I even knew it, which I don't, and neither do you, and neither does he matter enough for anyone to. Suppose I asked him, 'What's the bravest thing you've ever done?' You know what he'd say." He paused for effect. He let the silence sit. He was good at this, I'll grant the man that. "Nothing," the coach said. He'd say nothing, because they train it out of him. The bravery, the story, the self, he's not allowed a self. He's furniture with a pulse. Furniture with a pulse. The young man with the phone laughed out loud at that one, and I heard him repeat it into his camera, delighted. A woman near him winced and looked away, embarrassed for all of us, but she didn't leave. And Vane stood. The bearskin caught the light. A pigeon landed on the cobblestones near his boot and walked an unbothered circle and flew off again. And he did not look at it. And somehow that was the most dignified thing in the whole plaza. that a man could be mocked by a stranger with a microphone and a paying crowd, and find the pigeon and the insult equally beneath his notice. I want to stop here and tell you what I was thinking, because I was the one who broke first, not him. I was thinking, say something. Not out loud, I'd never. But inside I was furious, the way you get furious on behalf of a man too disciplined to be furious for himself. I wanted to march the 4 steps to that little stage and tell 200 people in gray shirts that the man they were laughing at had done more before breakfast than their coach had done in his soft, loud life. The trouble was, I didn't have a single fact to back it up. I didn't know what Vane had done. I only knew the shape of him, the way he carried his stillness like it had been forged somewhere terrible, the small old scar at his hairline he never explained, the way he'd once, only once, told a green recruit who was panicking about a long night shift, "Cold is just a thing that wants you to quit. Don't quit. That's all cold is." And then he'd said nothing else about it ever. So I held my own post and my own tongue, and I burned. The coach was building to something now. He clicked his clicker and the big screen behind him changed, and I caught it from the corner of my eye, a photograph, washed pale by the daylight but readable, a wall of white, a slope of snow under a bruised sky, and small dark figures roped together, bent into a wind you could almost hear through the still image. It was the kind of picture that stops a room. The gray shirts went quiet looking at it. "Now this," the coach said, and his voice dropped to the reverent register these men use when they're about to borrow someone else's courage. "This is a story about drive, about refusing to be a nobody. Some of you have heard me tell it. It's the best story I know, and I tell it because it's true, and because it is the exact opposite of that gentleman behind me." He let the picture hang. "Years ago," he said, "a research team got stranded, way out past where any help could reach. Storm closed in, equipment failed, 2 of them hurt. By every rule of survival, those people were gone, finished. Statistics." He clicked. A new image. A thin line of figures crossing a ridge. The lead figure turned slightly back toward the others, one arm raised, beckoning. "But there was one man on that team," the coach went on, and now he was almost whispering into the headset, 200 people leaning in, one man who would not accept it. No title that mattered out there. No rank, just a will. He got every single one of them out, walked them through 6 days of weather that should have killed them all, on rations meant for 2 days, and he lost not one. Not one. They found them on the 7th morning, all alive, because one man refused to be a nobody. The crowd actually applauded, for a photograph, for a story. And God help me, I felt it too, the pull of it, the way a good story reaches into your chest. It was a magnificent thing he was describing. I forgot for a second to be angry. Then I glanced at Vane. And the man who had not moved for an hour, who had let himself be called furniture, a nobody, a surrendered life without so much as a blink. That man was looking at the screen. It was nothing, a fraction of a degree. His eyes had come off the middle distance and found the projected image, the thin line of roped figures on the ridge, and held there, just for a breath, then forward again, set still. But I had spent 3 years learning to read a face built to give nothing away, and I read it then. It wasn't curiosity. It was the look of a man hearing his own life described by a stranger who had no idea he was standing next to it. I told myself I was imagining it. A guardsman invents things on a long post. The mind reaches for entertainment. So I filed it away and stood my watch. But the coach wasn't done. Men like him never are. The applause only tells them to dig deeper. He clicked again, and the screen filled with a third image, a close one this time, pulled in tight on a face. Frostbitten, wind-cracked, beard rimed white, eyes sunk and burning out of a hood. The face of a man at the absolute edge of himself and refusing to fall over it. "This," the coach said, soft and triumphant, "is what drive looks like. This is the leader, the one who walked them out. They wrote about him. There's a whole account of it, every step, the decisions he made when the rest had quit in their hearts. I've read it 40 times. I read it on the hard mornings. Because if he could refuse to be a nobody on the side of a mountain with 2 dying friends, then you, he swept his hand across the gray shirts, you can refuse to be a nobody in a meeting that runs late. They loved that, they actually cheered. And I looked at the frostbitten face on the screen, and then I looked at Corporal Ellis Vane under his bearskin, and I felt the cobblestones tilt under me. Because the screen was washed out, you understand, pale in the daylight. And the man on it had a beard and a hood and 20 years of weather between the photograph and now. But there was a line in that ruined face, the set of the brow, the particular flatness of a man who has decided not to feel the cold, and I had seen that exact line 8 feet to my left every single morning for 3 years. I told myself it was nonsense. Faces in extremity all look alike. The cold and the fear pull men into the same mask. There are 1,000 expedition leaders. I'd never even heard the man on stage say a name. But then he said one. His name was Vane, the coach announced, and my heart stopped clean in my chest. Ellis Vane, you can look it up. The Vane Crossing, they ended up calling it, not because he wanted the credit. By every account he hated the fuss, but because what he did out there has no other word. A crossing nobody should have survived. And here's the part I love. He grinned at the crowd. After all that, after being the man the whole world should have known, he vanished. Walked away from the speaking circuit, the books, the lot. Some say he joined the service. Quietly. Nobody knows where he went. He spread his arms wide, the showman landing his point, utterly unaware. That, he said, is a man who understood his own worth so completely he didn't need anyone to clap. Be like him. Not, and here, God forgive him, he jerked his thumb back over his shoulder, straight at the post, not like the surrendered fellow back there. I've replayed that moment more times than I can count. The coach with his arms out, his crowd in the palm of his hand, his thumb pointing at the one living man in the entire plaza who had actually done the thing he was selling, pointing at him, comparing him unfavorably to himself, the nobody in his own slideshow, and never knowing, never once knowing. Corporal Vane did not move. I, on the other hand, nearly came apart. I felt the blood go to my face. I wanted to laugh and I wanted to break formation, and I wanted, more than anything, for someone, anyone, to tell those 200 people what they were standing in front of. But that is exactly what we do not do. The guard does not announce himself. The guard does not correct the record. The guard stands. So I stood, and I watched a man be slandered with his own legend. The crowd was filtering forward now toward the stage, the way crowds do after a high point, wanting to be near the warmth of it. Several of them drifted close to our gate to take photographs, not of Vane exactly, but with him beside the curiosity, the costume, the surrendered fellow. A few held up their phones and made faces. The young man from the front row was still filming, and he sidled right up to the railing, close enough that I could hear him. "Look at this guy," he said into his camera, low and gleeful. "Coach is up there talking about real legends, and this dude's just gonna stand here like a lawn ornament his whole life. No offense, man." He waved a hand in front of Vane's face. "You in there? Hello? Anyone home in the bear hat?" Vane's eyes did not flicker. The hand passed before them like a cloud passing a statue. I will say this for my friend. There are men who would have answered that. Quietly, between the teeth, the way you can warn someone off without breaking your bearing. I have done it myself on bad days. Vane did not even give the boy that. He gave him nothing, which is the only thing that truly humbles a man who is performing for a camera, to be treated as weather, as a thing that is simply happening to a person who has more important business than you. The boy lost interest in a few seconds, exactly because he got nothing, and wandered back toward the stage. But here is what I noticed, and what I have never told anyone until now. As the boy turned away, Vane's gaze did move once, and it went past the boy, past the crowd, to the projection screen where the frostbitten face still hung in the daylight. And on Vane's own face, just for the length of a held breath, was an expression I had no name for. Not pride, not anger, something quieter and much heavier. the look of a man seeing a photograph of the worst week of his life, used as a sales pitch by a man who had never been cold a day in his. Then the screen changed. The coach had clicked to his next slide, some bullet-pointed list of principles, and the face was gone, and Vane went back to the middle distance, and the morning ground on. I thought that would be the end of it. A speaker insults a guard, the guard outlasts him, the speaker packs up his banner and his clicker and goes home to count his receipts. It happens more than you'd think. The post outlasts everything. But the coach made a mistake. He decided he wanted the prop to participate. "You know what?" he said, and the energy of the room shifted. The gray shirts could feel a stunt coming. "Let's do something. Let's do something real. I'm going to walk over there to that gentleman and I'm going to try to get one word out of him. One. Because I want you to see what surrender looks like up close. I want you to feel it, so you never let it happen to you." He came off the stage. He walked across the cobblestones with that loose, rolling confidence men cultivate when their whole income depends on looking unbothered. And 200 people followed in a loose crescent, phones up. And the morning that had been merely irritating became, in a few steps, something with the smell of a trap to it. He stopped a respectful 3 feet from the post. Even he knew better than to touch. He turned so the crowd could see his profile and veins together, and he smiled the smile of a man about to be generous in his victory. "Friend," he said warmly, no longer through the headset but close and conversational, though loud enough to carry. "I mean you no disrespect. Genuinely. You're part of this show whether you like it or not, so let me give you a gift. Tell these good people one thing, anything about yourself. Your name. What you did before this. The bravest thing you've ever done. Anything at all, and I'll buy you back your dignity in front of all of them." I stood at my own post, and I did not breathe. Vane looked at the middle distance. The bearskin sat heavy and black against the pale stone. His white gloves were perfectly still on the rifle. A long moment passed, the longest I can remember on that forecourt, 200 phones recording a man who would not be drawn. "Nothing," the coach said softer and turned to the crowd with his palms up, the showman's shrug. "You see, this is what I'm telling you. There's a whole human being in there, and he has decided he isn't worth a single sentence. That's not discipline anymore, friends. That's a tragedy in a tall hat." And the crowd, most of them, laughed. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make them villains, and they weren't. They were ordinary people on a Tuesday morning who had paid for a feeling and were getting it. The coach had told them a story about a frozen mountain and a man who would not quit, and then he had set a living statue beside it and said, "See the difference," and the difference flattered them. We are all, every one of us, a little hungry to be told we are not the nobody. The coach was simply a man who had learned to sell that hunger by the seat. But there was one person in that crescent who was not laughing, and I noticed her because she had been the one to wince an hour earlier. An older woman, gray at the temples, in a plain coat that didn't match the gray shirts. She'd come with a friend, I'd later learn, dragged along to a seminar she had no use for. And she was not looking at Vane the way the others were, as a curiosity to be poked. She was frowning at the screen. At the frostbitten face, which the coach had clicked back to for his finale, the way a preacher returns to his text. She was frowning the way you frown when something won't sit right. When a name and a face are circling each other in the back of your mind and refusing to land. The coach raised his voice again, full headset volume now, lifting his arms for the close. "So here is your lesson. Here is the whole morning in one picture. On that screen, a legend. A man who crossed the impossible and would not be a nobody." He swung his hand from the screen to the post, the comparison he'd been building to all morning, the kill shot. And right here, a nobody who crossed nothing, who follows orders, who will not even tell you his name. Choose, friends. Choose which one you're going to be. And the older woman in the plain coat said, not loudly, but in the small silence right after his line, into 100 recording phones. "His name is Ellis Vane." The coach laughed, half turning. "Sorry, what's that, love?" "That man," she said, and now she was pointing not at the screen, at the post, and her voice had steadied into something flat and certain. "His name is Ellis Vane, the same as the one on your screen. I'd stake my life on it." For a half-second the coach's smile didn't move, because his brain hadn't caught up to the threat. The man on the screen is the leader of the—" "I know who's on the screen," the woman said. "My brother was on that expedition." The forecourt went very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. I have stood through state ceremonies and 21-gun salutes and the long-held hush of a vigil, and I am telling you that the silence that fell on that plaza when the woman in the plain coat said my brother was on that expedition was as total as any of them. 200 phones, and not one person breathing. The coach recovered the way they do, with a chuckle and a raised hand. "Now hold on, that's a lovely thought, but the odds of—" "His name was Pell," the woman said, ignoring him entirely, walking forward now past the coach, straight toward the gate. "Tomas Pell, he was the youngest one. He broke his ankle on the third day, and he always said, he said it every year, at every dinner, until the day he passed, that there was a man who carried his pack for 3 days on top of his own, and gave him his own gloves, and talked to him every single hour through the worst night so he wouldn't fall asleep and not wake up. A man who never once said a frightened word. My brother said that man's name like it was a prayer." She had reached the railing now, and she was looking up into the still, set face under the bearskin, and her own face had begun to come apart. "He said Ellis Vane walked them out of the dark, and I have looked at the photographs in that account 1,000 times, young man. At every dinner my brother told the story. And I am looking at that face right now." Corporal Vane looked at the middle distance. "But I saw his jaw. I saw the single small movement of a man swallowing something enormous." "It's you," the woman whispered. "Isn't it? It's you." Vane did not answer her. He could not on post, not in front of a crowd, not with 200 lenses on him. To speak would have been to break the very thing that made him who he was. And I understood, watching, that this was the cruelest test of the whole morning. Not the insults, which he could let pass like weather, but this. A grieving woman naming the best thing he had ever done, asking him to confirm it, and the discipline holding his tongue. So he gave her the only thing the post allowed. He looked at her. He brought his eyes down off the middle distance slowly, the way a much heavier thing moves, and he looked directly at the woman in the plain coat. And he held it. Not a flicker, not a glance. He looked at her the way you look at someone you are telling the truth to without words. And then, so small that half the crowd missed it and the cameras nearly didn't catch it, he inclined his head. Once. A fraction of a degree. The smallest bow a man can make and still mean it with his whole soul. The woman put her hand over her mouth. She made a sound, not a word, just the sound a person makes when 20 years of someone else's gratitude finally finds the man it belongs to, and she said behind her hand, "Thank you. Oh, thank you. He lived. Because of you, my brother got 15 more years. He got to walk me down, he got to, and she couldn't finish it, and she didn't have to." And the forecourt broke open. I don't mean it became loud. It became the opposite. A wave of understanding rolled through those 200 people, and you could watch it travel, the phones lowering one by one, the gray shirts turning from the woman to the screen to the silent guard and back, doing the arithmetic, arriving all at once at the thing the coach had been standing in front of for an hour without seeing it. The legend on the screen, the nobody at the post. The same man. Somewhere in the crowd a young woman said, clear in the quiet, "He carried her brother's pack for 3 days." And someone else said, "That's the man in the book." And the murmur built, not into noise but into a kind of pressure, 200 people realizing simultaneously that they had spent the morning laughing at the one person among them who had actually done the impossible thing they'd come to be inspired by. And the coach stood in the middle of it with his clicker in his hand and his banner behind him, and his face. I watched his face, going through every shade a face can go. The smile hanging on out of habit, then the smile fighting, then the smile losing. because here is what he understood all at once, and what made it land so hard. He hadn't just mocked a stranger. He had mocked the very man whose courage he had built his career on borrowing. He had read that account 40 times. He had stood on 100 stages and made grown men weep with the story of Ellis Vane on the mountain. He had said the name that morning, Ellis Vane. You can look it up, said it with reverence, with his hand on his heart, and then turned 90 degrees and pointed his thumb at the living article and called him furniture with a pulse. The nobody in his own slideshow was the legend in his own slideshow. They had been the same man the whole time, 8 feet apart, and the coach had built an entire morning on the gap between them. That's the coach started, and his amplified voice cracked, and he reached up and pulled the headset off his ear like it had bitten him. Without it, he was suddenly just a man in an expensive shirt on a stone plaza, much smaller than he'd been a minute before. There's no way to know that he's. Show them the picture again, the woman said. The coach didn't move. Show them the picture, she said again, and now there was steel in it, the steel of a sister who had sat through 1,000 tellings and earned the right. The close one, the leader, put it back on the screen and let everyone look at it and then look at him. Go on. I have never seen a man not want to press a button so badly in my life. But the crowd had turned, and a crowd that has turned is its own kind of weather, and so the coach, because he did not know what else to do, because the silence was unbearable, because 200 people were waiting, clicked his clicker with a shaking thumb. The screen filled again with the frostbitten face, the hood, the burning sunken eyes, the brow set against the cold, refusing it. And every head in that forecourt swung from the screen to the post. The bearskin, the white gloves, the eyes now back on the middle distance, perfectly still. The small old scar at the hairline that I'd wondered about for 3 years and never asked, because some men's scars are sentences they've chosen not to read aloud. The same brow, the same flat, unbreakable refusal to feel the cold. 20 years apart, the same man. I heard a man near the front say, very quietly, "Oh my God," and it wasn't an oath, it was an apology. I heard the young man who'd waved his hand in Vane's face and called him a lawn ornament go absolutely silent and slowly lower his phone, and I watched the color leave him as he understood what he had filmed himself doing. The coach stood under the screen, under the face, beside the man, and he had nothing. For the first time all morning, the peak performance coach had no performance left. The clicker hung at his side. He looked at Vane, really looked, the way you look at a thing you have been wrong about, and his mouth opened and closed. I read your account, he finally said, quietly, not for the crowd, to the guard, 40 times. Every word of it, the third night, the river crossing, the part where he stopped. His voice had gone thin and young. I tell people about you. I tell them what you did. I've built a hole, he couldn't say it. To say it was to indict himself. He had built a livelihood on a man's courage and then mistaken the man for a fool. Vane looked at the middle distance and said nothing, and that nothing was louder than every word the coach had spoken all morning. What happened next I have thought about for a long time, because it taught me something I should have learned years before, standing beside a man I thought I knew. The coach turned to his crowd, the 200 gray shirts. And I braced myself because I expected him to do what cornered showmen do, to spin it, to fold it into the lesson, to say something like, "There you go, friends. Even legends choose humility and salvage the morning." That is the move. I had seen it from his kind a dozen times. He didn't make it. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe the thing was simply too big to spin. Or maybe, and I would like to believe this, because I am told even loud men can be reached, something in him broke clean and honest in front of all those people. Because what he did was set the clicker down on the edge of the stage, and take off the headset entirely and lay it beside the clicker, and turn back to face Corporal Ellis Vane with empty hands. And he said in a plain voice, no amplification, the smallest I'd heard him all day, "I'm sorry." The crowd was utterly silent. I have stood in front of rooms, the coach said, and told your story and made it mine. I have made money on your worst week, and I just in front of all these people I called you a nobody to your face, while you stood there and took it the way you took the mountain. He shook his head slowly. You're the bravest man I've ever talked about, and I didn't recognize you because you weren't shouting, because you didn't need me to know. He turned to the gray shirts, and his voice found one last bit of strength, but it was a different strength than the one he'd come with. Forget everything I told you this morning, he said, all of it. Here's the only true thing I've said all day, and I didn't even mean to. The man on the screen and the man at the gate are the same man, the legend and the one I called a nobody. And the difference between them, the difference I built a whole career selling you, does not exist. It never did. The bravest man in this plaza spent the morning letting a fool insult him and never once needed you to know who he was. He swallowed. That's not surrender. I had it exactly backwards. That's the strongest thing a person can do, and I have never in my life been able to do it for 10 seconds, let alone an hour. And then the peak performance coach did the last thing I expected, the thing I will remember longest. He faced the post, and he straightened himself, and he gave Corporal Vane a slow, deliberate, proper bow. The real kind, from the waist, the kind a man gives when he has nothing left to perform and only respect to offer. 200 people watched him do it. And then, without anyone organizing it, without a word, they began to do the same. Not all at once. It rippled. The woman in the plain coat first, who had earned it. Then the young man who'd called him a lawn ornament, red to the ears, bowing lower than anyone. Then the gray shirts, in 2s and 3s, until the whole crescent of them, 200 strong, who had laughed an hour before, stood with their heads lowered toward a single still guardsman in a red tunic who had not asked for a single one of them, and would not have, not if he stood that post for 50 years. Corporal Ellis Vane looked at the middle distance. But I was 8 feet away, and I will go to my grave swearing to what I saw. As the bows came, his eyes just once more left the middle distance and traveled across them, across the whole bowed crowd, and there was no triumph in it, no vindication. He looked at them the way he must have looked at that line of roped figures on the ridge, 20 years and a lifetime ago, not as people who had wronged him, but as people he was, somehow, still responsible for. People he would have walked out of the dark, every one of them, the loud ones first. Then his eyes went forward and set, and he was the post again. The coach packed up quietly. There was no more seminar. You can't follow a thing like that with bullet points. The gray shirts drifted off in a hush, most of them stopping near the gate on their way out, not to mock now, but just to stand a moment in the presence of it, and then move on, changed in some small way they'd be explaining to people for years. The woman in the plain coat stayed last. She didn't try to speak to him again. She simply stood at the railing for a long while, looking up at the man who had carried her brother through the worst night of his life, and then she pressed her hand flat against her own heart and held it there and walked away. When the forecourt was finally empty and the relief came at noon, I marched off post beside Vane in step, the way we always did, and I waited until we were through the inner arch and out of every sightline before I said anything. You could have said one word, I told him, just one to her. You could have told her it was you. He kept walking. For a long moment I thought he wasn't going to answer at all, which was the most likely outcome with Vane. But then, quiet, eyes ahead, he said, "She didn't need me to say it. She already knew. The only thing she needed was for it to be true." He let that sit. "And it doesn't stop being true if I keep my mouth shut." We walked. "Why'd you never tell me?" I asked. 3 years I'd have looked at you different." "That's why," he said. And that was all the answer I got, and the longer I've lived with it, the more I've understood it was the whole answer. Because I had spent that morning wanting to defend him, wanting to march over and tell 200 strangers what he'd done, so they'd respect him. And the whole time, the man himself had wanted nothing of the kind. He didn't carry that legend to be looked at differently. He'd left the books and the stages and the speaking circuit precisely so that no one would. He had taken the thing that should have made him famous and he had buried it inside himself, and gone and found the quietest, hardest post in the kingdom, and stood on it, and let a loud man call him a nobody, because to Ellis Vane, the bravery on the mountain and the bravery on the forecourt were the same bravery. The refusal to need anyone to know. The willingness to do the hard thing in the cold and the dark and tell no one, because the doing was the point and the credit was nothing. The coach had been selling drive. Ellis Vane had walked 7 people out of a frozen death and then spent 20 years proving that the truest strength has no audience at all. I went back to my own quarters that night and I could not sleep. I kept seeing the screen, the frostbitten face, and the post, and the two of them the same man. And I kept hearing the coach. That, my friends, is a man who surrendered his life. He had it exactly backwards, and he'd had the decency at the end to say so. A man who surrenders his life is one who needs the whole world watching to feel that he exists. The man at the gate was the other thing entirely. He existed completely and asked no one to confirm it. He had crossed the impossible and then chosen the unglamorous, and stood there in the cold of ordinary mornings the same way he'd stood in the cold of that mountain, without flinching, without complaint, without needing one soul to know his name. They still call it the Vane Crossing, in the account the coach read 40 times. But I'll tell you the truest crossing the man ever made. It was the 4 steps from that post to the inner arch at noon, after 200 people had bowed to him, walking off in step beside me with his eyes ahead, and nothing changed in him at all, not lifted by their praise any more than he'd been lowered by their mockery, because he had learned, somewhere out in the white, that the only opinion that ever survives the cold is the one a man holds of himself when no one is watching. Corporal Ellis Vane went back on post the next morning, same square of stone, same middle distance, same heavy black bearskin in the same pale light. And nobody who passed would ever have guessed a thing about him. Which, I have finally come to understand, was exactly how he wanted it.